Tonight, I'm showing you how to build a full partition wall in your garage. My family and I just moved into this house, and I desperately need to set up my shop so I can actually use my tools. My plan here is to partition off this bay of the garage so that I can close it off and insulate it to be able to work in heat and humidity. And that meant that I had to build a wall. Now, this wall was going to be evenly splitting the two bays, but I still had to figure out where I was going to put the door. After looking at tons of different options for laying out my shop, I decided that I wanted to put my drill press in the back corner of the room here, which means I needed to move the door down from the corner about 42 inches. With that position decided, I could now lay out my wall. I decided to use 2x6s for this wall so that I could put insulation in here as well as a bunch of wiring and air lines and anything else I can think of that I want to hide in the wall. If you want to build a wall like this in your garage, there's basically 5 steps to do this. The first one is to locate or install the sole plate or the base plate. For this board, it's really important to buy one that can handle ground contact. It's been treated with a product that makes it significantly less susceptible to rot. And you may not think so, but concrete can actually be very porous, which means moisture can come up from the ground into the board. It's really important to take your time when you're locating the sole plate because this defines the rest of your wall. If you don't have this straight, the rest of the wall is going to be off. Since this wall was about 19 feet long, I had to do it in 2 pieces. I did one before the door and one after the door. I marked both sides and then lined up the 2 pieces using a guide board. This guide helps keep the 2 pieces lined up exactly. Once I had them located, I marked the position of each stud along the wall. Then I drilled holes into the concrete in every other bay so I could anchor this down to the ground. This may be overkill, but since I don't have any embedded anchors in the concrete, I'm compensating by using more drilled anchors. Drilling in the concrete was actually surprisingly easy, just using a regular drill and a really good concrete bit. After placing and locating the anchors, we tapped the sole plate into place and tightened down the anchors. I was also lucky enough to have my dad come out and help in this process, which was awesome and made the whole thing go a lot faster. Once the sole plate is located, the next step is to install the top plate. Now, since this wall is not needed to hold up the floor above it, it's considered a non-load bearing wall, which means I don't need to do the double top plate on top of it. I can just do a single top plate and then I'll anchor that to the joists up above. Fortunately, the previous owner of this house left the full construction plans for me so I can see what the framing was in the ceiling. I can see where the joists line up. That gave me a pretty good idea of what I was anchoring into in the ceiling. I really wanted to know for sure though, and since I was eventually going to be needing to get up to the attic to run wiring, I figured I probably should just cut an attic access hole now. The attic in this area actually had no access points. Now the location of this hole was mostly an educated guess, but when I popped through the ceiling and I looked around at the framing inside, I was blown away to see that the area that I had cut through was exactly where they had framed it in already for an access point. They just never cut the drywall hole. Of all the places I could have put a hole in this ceiling, that was the one I picked. I'm calling that karma. With that hole cut out, I was able to confirm that the new wall was directly below a structural beam. So I didn't really have to worry about hitting a joist with my ceiling anchors. Wherever I put in something, it's going to go into the beam, so it was going to be fine. At this point, I realized I could really use a chalk line since my other chalk line was lost somewhere in one of the boxes that I had. So I sent my dad to Home Depot to pick up another one, and we snapped the line for this top plate. I then anchored the top plate to the ceiling using structural screws. These are really strong and are designed as lag bolt replacements. Again, since this was a non-load bearing wall, I just did the single top plate. Because of the length of this wall, I also had to do it in 2 pieces. The splice in the top plate is supposed to be tied together with a steel plate per code, but I'm also anchoring both sides of the beam above. I then put more structural anchors into the beam above in about every bay. Step number 3 was to install the studs. A garage floor is usually designed with a slope sloping away from the house. This makes it so that if you have water or any other liquids in your garage, it doesn't go back into the house, but it comes out. What that meant in this instance is that from one end of the wall to the other, I had a difference in height of about 1.75 inches. So we measured and cut each stud individually before installing them. Now, I know that per code, I could toenail in these studs into the top plate and the sole plate, and it would be a perfectly legit way to frame. In fact, most framers would probably do this and it would work just fine. I just don't really trust toenails, and I don't feel like it's a very strong connection personally. And if you're not familiar, toenailing means putting in nails at an angle at the bottom, just catching the bottom end of a board. So I decided to install some Simpson brackets on every other stud just for redundancy. You don't have to do this unless you don't believe in toenails, like me. The 4th step is to frame in your doors and windows. For this wall, I only had a door, so I located the king studs first and then nailed the jack studs to those. This is going to be a standard 36-inch by 80-inch door, which means the framed opening needs to be 38 inches by 82 inches. I also did a non-structural header above this, which is just 2 2x6s nailed together because there's no weight coming from up above. Above that, I installed the cripples, which fill in the space above the door. Step number 5 is to add fillers and blocking. Now for this location, I had to space out the framing from the wall about 2 inches because of the footing in the garage that sticks out. That pushed out the last stud on either end of the wall. In order to install drywall or anything else behind there, you need to have support behind the wall so you can screw into it. So I used some 2x and other scrap material to keep those in place so that I could screw my drywall on later. This ceiling in here is 10 feet tall, which means you have to add blocking between the studs. I'm adding it in locations where I'll need a backer for attaching drywall. Another purpose of the blocking is to create a fire stop to prevent airflow in a wall cavity. These walls, however, are going to be filled with fiberglass insulation, which is considered sufficient for fire blocking. I feel like framing is so rewarding because you can quickly see the progress and you can see what the room is going to look like. Let me know if this was helpful for you or if you think there's something I left out. Now, I will put this disclaimer out there that I'm not a general contractor, so it's possible that there may be some little things that I missed in this. But I've talked to a lot of contractors and I think this is all per code. Let me know though if there's something that I missed. Now that I have this wall in place, I can start installing all of the electrical stuff, and there's a lot of that. You're not going to want to miss that one, so make sure you're subscribed to see when the next video comes out. Now, go build something, and we'll see you next time.